Hello everyone, Bag here. Man, it has been hard waiting to make this video, but after Lingsha's release there's no other reason to delay it. This is the first video updating my unit tier list. While I don't think watching the previous video is essential to watch this one, I won't be re-explaining anything I don't have anything to say about. This video will just be going over changes that I've made, as well as adding Moze, Lingsha, and Feixiao to the rankings. There were a lot of constructive comments on my last video, which I do appreciate. I know some of my takes are a bit out there, so this video, like the original one, will both reflect my updated opinions in the last month, as well as better incorporating the community's opinions for certain controversial placements. I think we all know who I'm referring to here, but if not, then you'll see as we get into things. To start off, for the first 3 tiers, there are no changes at all. If anything, March is even more justified to be at the top of the bottom tier, with her fast follow-ups for Feixiao and Moze, but I mean that's pretty cope, which I guess is in line with where she's placed. For now, the main thing I want to talk about is that I'm still not changing my stance on Blade and Shui. Blade is doing decently for his standards in the latest Memory of Chaos rotation, while Quantum has been kind of snubbed for Shui. In general, I don't want this list to be super reactionary with giving the given rotations a lot of sway with volatile units like Shui or Himiko, but I think the current rotations do a good job in showcasing how she can be very inconsistent. I mean, I built my Shui, unlike Xiox, like 3 patches ago, and I have yet to find a use for her since. Take that anecdotal information as you will, but the main idea is that 4-star carries are ultimately very difficult to justify using once you have enough limited carries on your account, as opposed to 4-stars like Tingyuan or Lynx who still have their unique niches that are entirely for themselves. When the only job for a carry is to do damage, 4-star carries are more easily outclassed than 4-star supports, unfortunately. The first actual change is something I was too chicken to do last time, but in all honesty, I can't really come up with a reason to put Luocha over Lynx. Obviously, he has much better comfort in keeping the team alive, but Lynx having tangible, unique niches in teams makes her overall more useful than Luocha's uber healing. Maybe if buff removals get more important, then he will have more of a purpose, but right now, he just does not have enough tangible utility that is unique to him, since as I've said before, he is outclassed in being uber SP positive by Gallagher. This video may have a lot of me conceding on certain placements, so maybe I'm just feeling the need to compensate for that by introducing new hot takes, so that this tier list feels unique enough for me? Surely that's not my actual thought process, right? Anyways, for the biggest tier, we have only 2 shifts within it, with the first one being moving up Argenti. Pure Fiction is the biggest character check game mode, and Argenti, for now, is still more than useful to fulfill that use for an account by himself. Ultimately, for this list, I want to shift the criteria a bit away from how worth it a unit is. I instead want to frame it more as, if you already have this unit, how much use will you get out of them on average? In this, I'd want to weigh competition a bit less than I did previously, and I want to more so just look at a unit for what they can bring to an account if you do end up already having them. So if they bring nothing, like say Natasha, who is worse than 2 other free-ish healers, they get hurt. But Argenti being only outclassed by other limited 5-stars means that if you have him, you'll probably find a use for him, unless if you already have Jade. Right now, his performance is good enough to clear Pure Fiction perfectly fine anyways, so while I do think Jade is a better pull, I don't think Argenti should be punished that much for being in the competition for filling the same niche, since their actual performance is so similar. I'll only really weigh competition if that competition severely limits how much use you can bring to the average account. If you're someone like Topaz, who has close enough competition with 4-stars, but you're still generally the best option for that niche, you're fine. So, for now, Argenti is fine enough to be higher than he was previously, but time will tell how long it will take for Pure Fiction to be power clipped enough for that difference between him and Jade to actually matter that much. For the next change I want to briefly touch on, I'd want to lower Topaz just a tad. Yes, I just said that she was fine, but these reasons are different from what I was saying before. If you want my full thoughts on her as a unit, I made a video on how pullable she is pretty recently. And while that video is more focused on how pullable a unit is as opposed to the different criteria that I just talked about, the basic points on how I view her remain the same. She is the best unit in her niche, but I'm hesitant to say that that niche as a whole is more useful than what Bronya brings to an account. So I guess I could say she's slightly more useful than Tingyuan. Well, for teams like Yunli or Ratio, the difference between Tingyuan and Topaz is negligible at best, and Tingyuan has plenty of teams that she is more useful than Topaz in. So in all honesty, I can't really put Topaz higher than Tingyuan. Putting her right beside March feels weird since Topaz is a good chunk better than her, but there was already a big gap between Tingyuan and March beforehand, so now Topaz exists within that gap. being much closer to Tingyun than March overall. Also, just to note, it might seem a bit weird to have this niche as a whole not higher than it was previously now that they can support Feixiao, but really, I think their placement in the second to highest tier is just about right for them. Honestly, if Feixiao didn't come out like this patch, I would have probably moved Marsh and the rest of this niche down a little bit, but Feixiao giving them a new use keeps them above the likes of Dill or Jingliu. Now, with another choice that I was on the fence about last video, I will be promoting the units that I was strict about promoting last time. Yunli, Huohuo, get into the highest tier, and Gallagher, look, I already talked about him a lot last time, but basically, his lack of universal utility and conditional strength with his high toughness damage makes him less ideal than the choices above him. He has earned this spot at the top with his strong niches in SB generation, break buffs, and his quantity in debuffs, but I still don't really think it's enough to get him up to the final tier. So for now, fittingly, he'll stay as the guard dog to the top tier. But enough about him, talking about the units who have actually shifted in the list, Yunli's account versatility cannot be overstated. I called her the Swiss Army knife of Star Rail in my initial ranking of her, and I still feel that when it comes to that role, she is the best carry in the game by far. In that case, having her right next to Feixiao felt a bit wrong. And the same goes for Huohuo. Her utility as a sustainer is incredibly strong, and while I do overall still prefer the preservation duo above her, her position as a universal sustain just gives her so much account utility as a baseline, which puts her solidly over the erudition units that she used to be next to. They are the new threshold to this top tier. Universal uses across 2 or more game modes with essentially unconditional utility that is hard or impossible to replace with another unit. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. War is over, peace has spread across the land, and the cow has jumped over the moon. I will step down from my Fushuan versus Aventurine take. Now look, I still believe that she was better in the last patch that last video was in the context of, but the addition of Feixiao and Moze gives him even more best-in-slot teams than he already has. While I do still think Fushuan's quality in utility is more useful for a given random team, the sheer quantity of different units who want Aventurine as their sustain is simply too much for me to ignore as much as my stubbornness wants to. A lot of comments also correctly pointed out that I admittedly undervalued his toughness damage a bit, which isn't the most important thing about him, but with Apocalyptic Shadow, it should have been something I've mentioned in the times that I talked about him. These 2 units were so close before in how I viewed them, that this slight new utility for Aventurine that comes with these new units was enough to make me budge. I'm sorry Fushuan Nation, all 3 of her fans, I have failed you. And for the last change before we get into the new units, I will swap Firefly and Robin. For Firefly, while I do still hold the opinion that she is the best carry in the game, just due to how easy she is to build and how universal she can be, I think her over-reliance on Ranmei is a very tangible weakness that the other top tier carries don't really have an equivalent to. She only needs Ranmei to get what is essentially her best team without the new Lingsha, but without Ranmei, she falls a bit behind. I think that dynamic is easier to deal with than Acheron's dynamic with her premium options, but I do think it should drag her down a bit more than I originally thought. Robin, on top of benefiting from the same additional utility as Aventurine with Moze and Feixiao, is also just such an insane support that cannot really be understated. Firefly might make a team work with minimal effort, but Robin can be an upgrade for practically any team you put her in. Her dubious energy needs gives her a bit less universal potential as Ranmei, as there are certain teams that help her more than others, but even on a team where she doesn't fit at all, she still puts in a lot of work. Ultimately, Firefly is dependent on another unit to be this high, while Robin is a unit that anyone can depend on. Damn, it's like poetry. It rhymes. Now, we get to the 3 new units. Let's start off with the new 4-star, Moze. Keep in mind that the 4 stars on this list are at E6, which matters a lot for him since his Eidolons are actually a big part of his strength. At E6, he exists as being just below Topaz, but definitively above March, meaning that his placement on this tier list is pretty easy, since the niche he exists in is already grouped together. I do also want to note that the first beta version of Moze would have unironically been a bottom 5 unit in the entire game. Oh my god, he was insanely horrible. It's great to see him up here after watching his journey throughout the betas, as he's probably gotten the biggest glow up of any unit in the game, period. Like always, I'll give him a lot of points for interacting with follow-ups, since it's such a thriving playstyle, and his hit requirement for his skill makes it so that his potential is only really linked with the units that you play him with. So in the future, I could see him getting even stronger if there are units who can attack even more than someone like Feixiao. He has that potential in his kit to truly become insane, but for now, that's not really being heavily considered. He is a fun and simple unit who has thoroughly carved his own niche as a 4-star. You love to see it. Next is Lingsha, who I went back and forth on for a while. Ultimately, with the new way that I'm viewing this tier list, I won't knock her that much for being so similar to Gallagher, since this is not a pullability tier list, and if you do have her, you will find a lot of uses for her. I think, ultimately, she is a Gallagher that breaches into the very bottom of the meta tier. While she loses the SP generation and quantity of debuffs that Gallagher has, her much better personal damage, better break buffs, and the follow-ups in her kit gives her enough niches to be truly notable. She is ultimately still very reliant on fire weaknesses to find her true niche, which is ultimately the reason why I have her below the other sustained competition, who have virtually zero conditions to be in their full potential, but when she is given the opportunity to shine, she could be stronger than any other sustain. If you have her with a support that buffs the whole team, like Ranmei in a break comp or Robin in a follow-up comp, her personal damage can help massively in low HP enemy game modes like Pure Fiction. It's still worse utility than Aventurine's ult debuff, but by itself it helps her break out of just being a break support and nothing more. She is probably the unit in this tier that I'd recommend the least, which is fitting since she's at the bottom, but her strength barely warrants placing her here. And last but not least, we have Feixiao. This is another unit who varied wildly in my placements from the beta to her release to me actually getting her and trying her out myself. Previously, I was going to put her alongside Yun Li, as I viewed her to be too dependent on Robin to get to her full potential, which held her back from going higher. But her non-Robin teams have performed much better than I initially expected, and with Bronya and March as very strong free options for her team, her strength for the average account is immense. While I still think it's easier to get Boothill or Firefly's optimal teams, I generally think Feixiao is at least more useful than Boothill thanks to having a slight Pure Fiction niche, which as I've said ad nauseum is something most accounts are looking for. So above Boothill then? Well, I think putting her above Acheron makes sense, as her teams are overall cheaper, and her performance at lower levels of investment is a lot stronger. Keep in mind that this list is looking at E0 S0 5 stars, and Acheron without her signature is a lot more rough than Feixiao without her signature. I think the difference between them changes with every rotation of each game mode, as while Apocalyptic Shadow is the hunt game mode, whether or not Feixiao performs better than Acheron in Memory of Chaos highly depends on the overall layout. Overall though, I think Feixiao is slightly more useful for the average account, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that take. And with that, that's everything. The next tier list video will just be for Rappa, as she is the only new unit of the next patch, as well as any further changes I make with the existing units in that time, so it probably won't be nearly as long as this video, but hopefully it'll be entertaining nonetheless. I hope to see you all again, make sure to subscribe and watch my other vids. Bye!